everybody. Welcome to the first ever Rainbow Space Magic Con. This is the Building Queer Character Arcs subtitle long panel. And we will introduce ourselves. Let's start with Olivia.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia Helling and I'm really grateful for the chance to be on this panel today. I write wonderfully dark gay fantasy. My current work includes the dark fantasy series, Godspeed Prince, and the historical fantasy romance series, Damon Snow. I'm demisexual and I use she, her pronouns.
And Chloe.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am an author. I usually write about, I write contemporary, like realistic fiction. I write sci-fi fantasy. I also dabble in comics here and there. So I kind of do a ton of different other things. But I identify as bisexual and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
And my name is Valerie Mikles. I am a scientist by day and author by night. I work on space satellites for a living. And I write science fiction. I'm heavily inspired by Firefly and Star Trek and Stargate. And I put queer characters everywhere because before I knew I was queer, I was just kind of figuring it out. And my most recent book is the Chinali virus, which this version is not for resale because there was a virus and I didn't want to order stuff from Amazon. So it's available in ebook and it's in the bookstore as well. And all my other books that you can see pictured behind me, they're very hard sci-fi. And I just redid the cover. So if you're looking for this cover, you won't find it. But if you look for the font, you will. And that's me. So to get started for building queer characters or building character arcs, I guess our first question is, how do you build a character arc?
No, not the tough questions already.
Okay, what's your favorite candy bar? Okay, no,
Pass.
we're gonna stick with the queer character arc.
Can't count.
So when you're creating a character for your gay dark fantasy, where do you start?
Generally speaking, I try to start from my own personal experiences, either talking about things that I have personally witnessed and experienced, and I try to start out with like a basic idea of who I want my character to be, and then I kind of pick out the parts that I know that from my own experience I can write, whereas there's other parts that I might not know so much about, and those are the parts that I need to do research on. So that's kind of generally where I tend to start, is I try to start from my personal experience and then I build off of it.
Yeah, and that's what I did with Chinali virus, because it was the first time that it's not the first time I've ever written an asexual character, but it's like, well, if I make an asexual aromantic character who's also a scientist, is that too Mary Sue? And then I was like, well, I've never seen it in fiction and I want to be represented. And right. So, you know, it's like, yeah, pull from what I know and what I understand. And then as I was adding other things, it's like, is this character agender? And then I was like, am I agender? What's going on? And
oh my gosh.
But right now my current work in progress is about a trans lesbian Jewish person. It was inspired by a friend. I've never been lesbian. I've never been Jewish. And I've only recently figured out what it means to be trans. And I don't know what it is to be MTF trans because, you know, I'm agender. But definitely lots of research and it's very confusing. Yeah. Olivia, did you want to add anything? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I always throw out a different question because I didn't prepare a whole list.
Well, I can expand a little on this too. Like, I haven't really written so much like my own like identity experience or like a lot of diversity. I normally do like gay or bisexual men. But where like it comes from my own experience is like, yeah, the character arc. Like, what is the lie that they believe? Usually something about how they are unlovable and they have to prove that they are worth something or worthy of love. And they have to figure out that, no, they were worthy of love all along, and learn to like accept themselves just as they are. And that's where I come from in my writing.
Yeah, a lot of my I have a lot of stories like that too, that what is the lie you believe? And that's a very interesting way to start, because it's not always about, am I worthy of love? It's, am I worthy of, being a parent? Am I worthy of being a scientist? And I think that imposter syndrome is very pervasive for a lot of us. And so, that definitely resonates as a starting point. That's a very good starting point.
Yeah. Thinking back to my own kind of experiences, one of the biggest themes I think in my writing is taking back control. Particularly when it comes to like women, I feel like there's aspects of our life where we feel like we don't have control, and where we feel like others may in fact have control of us, whether it's directly or indirectly, whether it's like just societal pressure, or whether it's like literally people physically controlling you. So I try and explore that a lot in my themes with Duality, which is my most recent book that released. This is about a character that kind of makes bad decisions, and then bad decisions happen to her, but she doesn't really take back a lot of control of her life. So kind of working through how she kind of unpacks how she made those mistakes, how she made mistakes, and how she can kind of make actions that improve her life and kind of give her that sense of control back.
Have you ever written a story where the character, like in the end, because they didn't ask for help or didn't take control, just, it kind of has a sadder ending, or do they always win?
I haven't written like a lot of tragedies. So no, I think that for the most part, they always win, but it's definitely a rocky road along the way. In fact, I would say that, not to spoil like the ending of my own book, but I would say at the end of at the end of Duality, I don't think that Kat, the protagonist, has really even reached a point where she is she's completely resolved all of her issues. There's certainly things that are going to carry forward into like the next book, because I think that there are things that you can't wrap up very simply with a character arc, and I think that there are things that will continue throughout a whole series, and then there are things that you want to focus on in one specific book. So I'm trying to kind of carry that sort of theme throughout the rest of the series.
Yeah, one of the themes that just showed up in my work from grade school is finding home. Like a person is lost and is searching for the place they fit in, a place to call home. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting how pervasive it is in my work. And it's like, I wrote this when I was 10. Why am I still feeling this? So in terms of building authentic characters, how do you get into the head of a character that doesn't match your personal experience or identity?
Oh gosh. Yeah. That's definitely really interesting question. It's kind of hard. For me, I'm writing right now like a little realistic fiction story about a bisexual Spanish Mexican man who's going to college in the 1990s. And for me, it's kind of hard because I'm like, well, I'm not a man and I'm not Latinx, so I don't know. I don't know all about those facets of identity, although like from talking with friends and things like that, I can certainly kind of build upon those ideas and of what experiences he would be going through. And I actually am really fortunate to have my friend, one of my best friends, he's Latinx, and he's been able to provide a lot of insight in regards to culture and like how his queerness intersects with his Latinx identity. So he's been a really valuable resource to me in writing. So a lot of the times when it's like I'm finding it a hard time to get into that headspace because I'm not that identity, I try to reach out to other people and learn about their own experiences. And I think that that's really key, because I feel like if you don't do that, then it's really obvious when you're not like writing about someone's experience or something that's more relatable.
Yeah, I definitely spend a lot of time on Reddit forums where people socialize and share their personal stories. And it's kind of amazing how much detail people will go into. But in terms of finding out about Jewish culture and Jewish religion, for me, it was, I come from a very evangelical Christian background. And then as I moved away from it, everybody's like, oh, like it's all the same religion, this religion, this religion, they're all the same. And then I learned things like, I'll just learn some little pieces, like they're not the same at all. It's like maybe there is some like high level overlap, but that's like saying all humans are human. And And there's just so much more detail to the culture. And I read a book recently, I think it was called The Consultant. It's an author that I usually like, and he had an Iranian woman character. And my first complaint about this book was just the treatment of the women characters in general. But she was Iranian, and he kept saying, like, she's very proud of her heritage. She's very proud of her heritage. And it's like, show me one thing from her heritage that has been folded into the story other than that she's proud of it. Because it's like, is there a dish she makes? Is there like a ritual that she has with her kid? Like, do we even see her pray during the entire book? No. I mean, there's got to be something there if you're going to bring in an identity that makes that identity real. But this is also about building tensions and character arcs. Olivia, did you want to add anything?
That I'm typically too shy to ask people direct questions about their own experiences. So I rely heavily on a lot of my books are based on history. So especially like historical accounts, things like what it was like to grow up with polio in the 50s or what it was like to be gay in like the 19th century. And also now I'm watching a lot more YouTube videos on like people talking about their own experiences and like who are kind of activists to be like, okay, this is something that I have to deal with that like most people don't realize, and this issue is actually really, or like this question that I keep being asked is really hurtful in this way, or like this is why this thing happens. And blogs too do this, personal blogs, and I love them, and I am really grateful for like YouTube and blogs now.
Yeah, YouTube blogs and Reddit stories have given a lot of people a voice that didn't have a voice before, and as an author, it does really help. So Harry asked, how do you decide the character's queer identity? Does it reveal itself to you? Do you decide you want to tell an ace or bi story and shed light on those experiences? And what's the deciding factor in a character's sexuality arc? I can answer that with this book. I have a character in this book. His name is Douglas Swan, and he's gay. And when I was first writing this book, I began this series like many years ago, and I was still a very conservative Christian from a very homophobic family. And I thought putting a gay character in my book would completely alienate my parents as readers. So I considered making him straight, and he would not be straight. He kept coming across as a very repressed gay man. And, so every scene became about proving his sexuality. So they tell me, like all of my characters at one point or another will tell me who they are. And sometimes it's just you put them in a room with somebody and all of a sudden something heats up and you're like, wait, that wasn't planned. Now I have to rewrite this whole thing. And but that's fun. And I'm a discovery writer, so I really discover who they are by what they tell me. And I can't shut them up once they tell me. There's like certain things that you can't change about them. So the deciding factor is them and who, they are living people in my head. Anybody else more of a plotter?
No, I mean, like, I don't think I've ever really sat down to write a story and I'm like, I'm going to have one gay character, I'm going to have one bi character, one ace character, one trans character, because that just feels like you're cramming in representation that you might not even be really thinking through all that well. When I sit down to write a character and I'm writing about like their dialogue, their appearance, like how they address other people, how they socialize with other people, that's generally when it comes out, that it, that they are queer, or that they are of a certain gender identity. So I think it just kind of unfolds naturally when you write. Certainly, I think it is okay for you to sit down and be like, I want to write a story about a gay character or a bi character. But again, that relates back to what we previously discussed before. Like, be sure to do your research. YouTube, Reddit stories, talking to people, that sort of thing.
I mean, with my current work in progress, I definitely intended to write a trans lesbian Jewish character, but, aside from that, like everything else is me asking them, who are you? What do you do? And, you know, like, are you married? Are you like, do you have a girlfriend? How do you interact with her? I mean, how did, you know, and so I'm still kind of learning from them, but I definitely started with an identity in mind. And then all the identities that fell around it is like, there are more lesbians in a story than I've ever written before, because I don't like, it turns out I don't usually write lesbians. Don't know why. But, you know, you get one and suddenly they multiply. It's crazy. But it was definitely trying to figure out what kind of story I wanted to write once I had that character in mind was also interesting, because if you go too far in the future, there's certain cultural things that we deal with that don't matter anymore. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, how do I make it matter without putting them in the middle of modern times with all the hatred and bigotry and taboos that are around us now? And that's, you know, so it's a time travel story. Olivia?
So I write, like, most of my stuff is like romance. So there's always like the strong romantic factor. So like my main characters have to be attracted to each other. Mm-hmm. and
do you usually start with one and build the other, or do you have the couple, like, do you have a couple in mind when you start?
That's a good question. It's been a while since like I've actually written a new couple that, because I keep just writing books with the same couples and then doing my brain just went off. Or like my last book that came with a prompt, so they told me who the couple was. But in the future, or like in the thing that I'm working on right now, well, I'm working on two things. One is like I want to do a demisexual character, like that's actually demisexual and not just kind of, oh, it came out that way because I didn't know that I was writing it that way. And my other one kind of, yeah, like I kind of thought he would be into guys, and then it was kind of more like, oh, but like actually like a lot of time he's not interested in anyone, but like he's building this friendship with this guy who is into him and not realizing that this guy is into him except as a friend. Mm-hmm. So we haven't really gotten to the romancy part of that. We'll see how that goes. I don't know.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So another question from the audience. What are some concrete steps I can take to make sure my queer character reads as authentic, especially if I don't share their identity? We've sort of touched on this, but anybody have any concrete? I'd say research. Mm-hmm. And however you do your research, whether that be the blogs and the YouTube videos, the talking to friends, you can also join Facebook communities where that identity is prominent and just observe the conversation. And if you get comfortable, you can ask the people there if they want to help. A lot of times people, it depends on the community, but some communities are very receptive to doing it. And some of them, if you just search the history of the community, you'll get enough answers. Because there's a lot of information. Anyone else have a comment?
I think it also goes back to thinking about how like intersectionality, how like different aspects of your identity impact that character and how that character navigates through their life. Like thinking about this one character that I'm writing for this story, the bisexual Mexican man, thinking about how maybe his connection to Catholicism or his connection to his culture might kind of make his coming out as bisexual man a little bit weird for him, or it kind of compounds it more so than maybe it would like a character who is not Latinx or someone who is white. So thinking about how those identities intersect, I think, is also really key, because then that can kind of change the way that they address like certain situations or ways that they might go about certain situations. Like, for example, this character, I imagine him to be out to his friends, but like it's going to take him a long time to be comfortable with coming out to his family, just because his family has that Catholic sort of traditional kind of like heteronormative background, especially when taken into the context of the story set in the 1990s. So thinking about how these different things intersect, I think can help you really not only understand the time period that you're writing in, or understand kind of how this character, the other characters and your protagonist relationship to these other characters, but the character itself, and can help also inform some part of the beats of the story arc for that character.
Have either of you used sensitivity readers?
I have not. And a large part of what I would like to in the future use sensitivity readers. I've tried to do some research into sensitivity readers in the past, and it's definitely possible that I haven't been as gone in depth with my research, but it is a little expensive for me to be able to afford a sensitivity reader, which is why I use so much of my own research and use so much of my friends. But knowing from the work that what sensitivity readers do, I would say that if you can do it, absolutely like work with a sensitivity reader, because they can give you a lot of insight into multiple aspects of the story and the characters.
Yeah, good people are hard to find. It's like when people say, oh, you should have X many beta readers, like, well, I sent it out to X many people, and then, you know, none of them got back, or two of them got back, or, you know, one got half back. I don't, you know, it's hard to find good people, like when you're leveraging for free. And then once you put money behind it, it has to be an identity. Like for Lost in Transit, there's definitely going to be a great need for sensitivity reader, because I'm so far out of my depth. But at the same time, for my other books, I felt close enough to like understanding these people as human beings, and far enough from a very specific culture and identity that I didn't use it for that.
Mm.
Olivia? It's just gonna be me saying Olivia. We'll have a montage.
Like jumping in. I haven't used a sensitivity reader yet. I do have some projects planned where it's like, yes, I definitely need to have a sensitivity reader. I can do all the research that I want, that I can, and then like it's always kind of like, oh, but like what if I just didn't know about X, and like but yeah, like
beta readers can catch a certain amount of that if you have the right cross section of beta readers, and they're not specific, like they might not be specialized sensitivity, but if they have some experience, they can bring that knowledge, I hope. So some of it is in the choice of editor, and and just in your publishing budget. There's a question for me. May I ask what made you decide to write a Jewish character? I'm Jewish, and I feel like we're not seen as particularly glamorous, exciting culture. It makes you go, I must write this character. And the answer to that is, I have a friend who's trans, lesbian, and Jewish, not a space traveler. I met her when, I don't know how many years ago now, 2013, 2014, I wrote a screenplay called Aces, about a bunch of asexuals surviving a hypersexual world. And this was before she transitioned. She was my sound person. And I didn't know she was trans at the time. But ever since she came out, she posts a lot about just trans rights and what it means to be transgender, and how difficult it is to be tabooed as transgender and lesbian. But then I also get all these things about anti-Semitism, which was eye-opening for me, because I didn't realize how rampant anti-Semitism was in America and in the world still. And, you know, I kind of put it to my Jewish friends, like, wait, do you guys experience this? And it's the, wait, you don't want to know. and so for me, as someone who'd never experienced that, it was it was just something that I wanted to celebrate and represent, because there's things about the trans community, like once you find that community, you find a place where you belong, you find support that you don't have elsewhere. And I think with the Jewish community, there's a lot of stuff about being part of the cultural community there that is the same kind of building spirits. Like you go someplace and you know that you're home. And so I really wanted to just celebrate this person in my life who's opened my eyes to this, and then also just create a story for that identity, because I haven't seen Jews in space. You know, it's like I've been looking for sci-fi books, and if you have any representing Jewish people in far future, please recommend them. But it's a hard category to find, and it shouldn't be, because if everyone else is represented, they should be too. Are there other questions? Are you guys looking at the Q&A? Oh, no, we are done. Okay. We still have time. So we need to talk about building tension between characters. Does anybody have a targeted way to start that topic?
I mean, yeah, thinking about building tension between characters, like one way that you can do it, I mean, it's just through a lot of my stories personally, like they involve like a lot of romantic pairings. So there's like a lot of inherent like romantic sexual tension that is inherently like built between the characters. But there are other ways that I think that you can explore tension between queer characters. So like the ways that they differentiate in terms of identity, like background, upbringing. Are there certain situations that they approach differently than compared to like another character? Like, for example, are there characters that are out and choose to embrace their identities wholeheartedly, or are there characters who distance themselves from the queer community for like one reason or another? So thinking also about how does one character perceive the other? That kind of is a way to kind of think about it. Like thinking about you know, from my own experience, like as a bisexual woman, thinking about how there's like biphobia within the queer community, and how there's biphobia in like a lot of the lesbian community, and how I personally have dealt with like biphobia in my own relationships, and kind of the different ways, the different ways that different identities are perceived by other people, I think is worthy of being explored in a story and can help to build tension between the characters.
I just have them not like each other. So I think for me, as aromantic, asexual, one of the hardest things for me to imagine is how sex gets in the way. Because it's something that I can emulate, but it's not something I can believe internally. Mm-hmm. When I was younger and I was told that all children are born into sin and there's this big problem with sin in the world, and it's like, well, why don't we just stop having children? I mean, that solves everything, right? And I was very confused as to why that didn't solve everything. But you know, there's definitely different thoughts that go through my head. So in Chinali Virus, there's a point where one of the characters has a crush on my aromantic, asexual, touch-averse lead, and he's like, well, why are you flirting? And she's like, what do you mean? and they work it out because he's a respectful person. And but you know, it's weird because that's the experience that I had a lot that created tension, was people thinking I was flirting when I was like, because I'm nice and I talk to you, I mean, you're a person, right? So what makes good tension in your stories, Olivia? You're in this conversation.
I relate to you, Valerie, because it's like, oh, there's like the romance stories where like, oh, they see each other and they're so hot for each other and they're instantly in love, and I'm like, what? That's not how things work. So I don't know, for character tension, it comes down to like characters and their differing like worldviews that may or may not be like based on their on identities or what they think about other identities, but also like
Well, in the name of queer characters being humans first and queer is just a part of that, what other forms of tension do we have aside from sexual and identity and phobia based?
well, okay, in the thing that I'm working on right now, I have like two characters from two different backgrounds. So like one is like very devout and like pretty sure that if he doesn't go into the world's version of the clergy, which he doesn't actually want to do, but like he thinks like that will get his guardian's love. And so he's very focused on duty, like ignoring life. And then the other character is like the complete opposite, where it's like duty is boring, duty is hard, you're never gonna live up to people's expectations. So why not just have fun right now? And so like, yeah, then it's just like the one character being like, okay, let's go do this. And the other character being like, no, you need to study now so you can pass your test. And he's like, well, if I pass my test, can we go do this? Like, sure.
Like a big heart and brain comic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay, yeah.
some of the so you're talking about you know, family expectations or parent-child like just societal expectations being a source of tension, and I think that's a really good. It's always a good way to start, because then you can instantly put the culture and the world into the story. Any other kinds of tension, Chloe?
Yeah, thinking about, I guess, morality is another good way to build tension. In duality specifically, there's the protagonist Kat. She kind of is a little bit whimsical, and she wants to do things that she wants to do, and may not be considering like all the consequences of certain decisions. So she kind of wants to rush head on into certain decisions. And I think that Melody, the other character who's the love interest in the story, Melody is a very like practical person, is very grounded in morals, and wants to, whereas Kat is willing to put herself at risk in more situations. Melody is a person that's like, I don't want anybody else to be at risk. I want to try and like control as much of the situation as possible. They have a debate in later on in the book about how they're going to address this particular kind of threat, and Melody just doesn't want Kat to have anything to do with it because she feels responsible for the situation in the first place. So like she carries a lot of guilt with her, and Kat just doesn't really perceive that or like understand that. So that's kind of like a point of contention between the two of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of put into the different types of authority and types of management and how people respond to that,
Right.
In that aspect, because you know, if you're the person who tries to control everything, that can either be because you're a control freak or because you've been a responsible one for your whole life and you've had to deal with the consequences of not being there.
Right. Yeah. Melody in Duality is definitely a character who I think has tried very, very hard to be responsible, and Kat is definitely irresponsible, but thinks she's responsible. So she doesn't quite fully acknowledge or understand like the ways that like Melody has had to live her life, and how Melody's life has been structured, and how Melody cares about other people. Kat's kind of like coming to terms with the fact that she is a very selfish person. A large part of the book is actually about her trying to unlearn selfishness. Yeah.
One thing I use a lot is socioeconomic status. And it's not like a big tension in terms of the plot, but it does create a lot of contrast in the characters, because you have someone who grew up rich, grew up with everything, and you have someone who, you know, has to scrounge and, you know, work for every little screw they put into their engine.
Right.
And then I also, one of the cities that my spaceship goes to, they're essentially in a dying city. The resources are 400 years old. Things are starting to break. Nobody knows how to fix them. And even if they did know how to fix them, they don't have parts. Mm-hmm. Things like clothing are very strictly regulated. So when he goes out, like when they take him to their town and he goes into a store and there's like 50 different varieties of shoes. And he's like, he just freaks out. He's like, why do you have all this? I mean, you're like, you need a couple pairs. Like, no, the ones on my feet are fine, you know, they still work. And, you know, and I feel like there's definitely a lot to be said when you're used to distributing resources, when you're used to living on, you know, just bare minimum versus when you're used to, well, if it breaks, I'll just get another. And it's a very different mindset. And, you know, and it creates a tension between the characters that is really fun, because then they have a chance to learn about each other. Okay, let's see. We have some more questions. You guys can also look at the Q&A if there's one you want to answer first. Let's see.
Susanna asks, are there character depictions in fiction and media that you particularly admire, and or writers whose character writing work you try to emulate? It's a really good one.
Oh my goodness. In the same book where I hated the women, the protagonist was written in first person and the voice was incredible. And it's on my shelf. I'll find it.
For me, a large part, I kind of fell out of touch with, as a kid when I was growing up, I kind of fell out of touch with fiction because a lot of the stories I grew up when Twilight was a big thing. And so at a certain point, whenever I showed up to the library to try and check something out, it was all about vampires, and I wasn't really like interested in vampire stories. So I took to reading comics, and actually I really started to love reading comics such as Terry Moore's Strangers in Paradise. He's a straight man that I think really he writes a lot of queer women characters and queer characters in general, and I think he really approaches them with a sensitivity and like a depth that like just blows my mind every time I go back to reread the series. So, and also like his dialogue is just so good and like so poignant, and I personally love that. So I definitely try and emulate his writing style a lot. Recently, I've also, because I'm currently studying film and television production, that's what I'm here in I'm a grad student. So I'm studying film and television production. So that means that I have to read a lot of screenwriters. So learning actually about kind of the work of the writers behind Breaking Bad has also been very useful in terms of like how they construct those characters, those subtle ways that they use dialogue, has also been really incredible and also been really helpful for me.
I'm thinking about the first season of Chuck. I don't know if any of you guys ever watched Chuck. It was about a nerd who worked at the equivalent of a Best Buy and downloaded CIA stuff and became, you know, quite a asset to spy stuff. And in the first 5 minutes, you know, I went from not paying attention to being completely absorbed for whatever reason, because it just had that good of a hook. And I thought they did really well in the first season of creating a nerdy character who actually brought his nerdiness to the game. So like if he hadn't been playing Call of Duty, he wouldn't have been able to do, you know, this thing to save the world or whatever. And I really like when you're working on a fish out of water story to be able to use a character's background. In Doctor Who, Donna Noble, who was the fourth companion, she was a temp and she was a very good typist and she was very good with files. And so there were times in certain episodes where she actually used that skill. She's like, I went to accounting and I learned all this, or I did this and I learned all this. And she brings valuable information because of her history, because of her background. And I appreciate any author who can create a character, especially a supporting character, and, you know, let them be more than just that token, but to have it come in very clever ways to help out. And I really enjoyed that. Yes, Olivia.
For me, it's like pretty much every character in She-Ra like is just so amazing, and like they're so different and they all act like according to their internal logic, and it is great. that's kind of what's inspired me right now. And like in the past, like Jin Hale, Jordan L. Hawk, KJ Charles, Gail Carriger, um, those people and those characters, I guess.
Can you share how you create your story arc within various genres? I see a lot of recommendations for something like the hero's journey, but obviously that doesn't fit every story. Do you plan out the story to have specific phrases in order, or just play with the structure as you go? That's a very loaded question. I don't plan character arcs per se. The character reveals themselves to me slowly as I discovery write. So I'm one of those people that will wind up with a novel's worth of deleted scenes that are just, you know, those little side scenes. And I love that about my process. But a lot of times I discover their growth as I'm editing the first draft. Sometimes I will, like, I guess my way of planning a chapter is to just write a list of here to here to here. And then I fill in the blanks all out of order, and then I work it out later. When I was writing this series, there's 3 more books coming. I was writing 17 books simultaneously in Google Docs, just adding scenes to different ones as I went. So I kind of had an idea of where the characters were going because I was writing so many books into the future. And in the editing phase, they've actually gone different directions, which is kind of interesting too. But they do progress because I did have, you know, where were they 5 years from now? Where were they 10 years from now? And I've already written those. Does anyone else want to talk about that? Yes. I can
Olivia,
see it.
go ahead.
You can't point to me.
Like, can you tell who I'm pointing to?
Point.
Well, I'll go first. So I'm like the opposite in that I'm a huge outliner, and I actually have like a form that's like, okay, we start with the lie, the truth, the ghost, the characteristic moment, and then we're gonna like have the prompts to tell me like when they kind of need to have certain realizations, and then like I work through that over and over again, changing things as like they're kind of revealed to me or like made more specific to me as that's my discovery writing, really. It's the outline. And with the genre, like I am big into story grid. So I usually look at what kind of external genre I'm gonna go for. And then like I try to work that into the character arc. So that like my scenes are focused on developing the character arc first, but also incorporating those genre aspects.
Yeah, I personally, in the past, when I've sat down to write a story, I don't tend to think that much about structure. I pretty much like have a concept for the plot and have a concept for just what I want the conflict to be and how we go about resolving the conflict. I just kind of have like that general idea, which now looking back on it, definitely makes some of my stories like messier than I would have liked. And so actually one of the things that I'm going to be trying to do in future books that I'm writing, I'm going to be trying to use more incorporate some of the things that I've actually learned from screenwriting. So thinking about kind of the save the cat, which is a really valuable tool. And honestly, like I've used it when I've been screenwriting, and I'm considering using some of those principles for writing my next book.
What is Save the Cat? Can you just give a quick?
Yeah, Save the Cat is just basically kind of, it's a book that's really more so applied towards the principles of screenwriting, and it kind of breaks down sort of the different sort of arcs that you go in a show or in a film.
Okay,
And
so it's a book that
yes.
techniques. Okay.
Yes, it's a book that has techniques that kind of says, here's this film, and then here's kind of like the different beats that you have to hit in a film.
Okay.
So I'm personally considering using those principles in my next book so that I can try to adapt it into a screenplay later, because that makes it a little bit easier. But it also helps to give me like a little bit of a sense of structure, because it kind of points out places where the protagonist might think that they've achieved their goal, but they didn't actually achieve their goal. So it's very formulaic, but I think it's also a good way of kind of identifying where conflict is supposed to go in your story, and where resolutions are happening, and where it's a good time to introduce like other characters that you may need. So I find it personally really useful, particularly in screenwriting, and I'm hoping to kind of experiment with it in novel writing.
Yeah, I was worried it was like SOHCAHTOA, and it was some kind of mnemonic device that I had to remember, which is sine, cosine, never mind. So we are nearing the end of our time. There's still a lot of really good questions, and I believe they will be preserved by the host, and then we can maybe put them to the Facebook group as well and continue the conversation there. Do we have time for one more question, or do we want to wrap up and say promos? That was a question to the panelists.
Say, what are you guys reading right now?
Sorry.
That's a quick question.
All right, I would like to try one more question. And are you seeing any good depictions of LGBT characters in current media? Do you use characters to help fuel your own? And what are you reading right now? Well, recently I've been doing, well, Friends has been on reruns during the day when I'm at work. And so I've been watching / listening to Friends, and I'm currently very angry at it because of their depiction of the lesbian couple, and because of their depiction of Chandler's dad, who is a gay drag queen. And it's portrayed as very deviant of a lifestyle. And I understand it's a comedy and that there are jokes that need to be involved, but I didn't really catch it the first time I was exposed to it. Now I'm looking at it like, this is a terrible, terrible way to introduce people to these lifestyles, because it portrays queerness as nothing but a trauma that you put on other people. So I would love to find some better depictions of queer characters in current media, but I just watch cooking shows.
Yeah.
Olivia, did you want to add something, or were you saying yay cooking shows?
Yeah, like watch She-Ra. Like, it is amazing for the amount of like different depictions, and it's just kind of like, this is how the world works. No one cares like if you are dating a woman or a man, or like or if you go by the pronouns they, like, it is amazing.
Yeah, She-Ra has definitely been really helpful for me in terms of just seeing more representation. Animation has really been doing a good job with writing queer characters. I mean, not even just She-Ra, but also looking at like Steven Universe. Loud House has a couple with two dads. Clarence also, which has been over for a while, but also like Adventure Time. Like a lot of things that a lot of animation has just been really making a lot of really good strides. I've also liked, the creator is very controversial, but the show is very controversial. So yeah, that's a whole other topic for a different time. But I really liked watching 12 Forever, which is a show on Netflix. It's really short, but I was really like addicted to it. It's about like a 12-year-old girl that doesn't want to grow up, but she's coming to terms with her queerness in like a few of the episodes. And so she, I think, was one of the first like explicitly like queer female characters in children's media. She was like kind of coming to terms with their sexuality. Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beast is also another excellent one, because Benson, Benson is awesome. So like I need to get into watching like season 2, and then you have Harley Quinn. Yeah, Harley Quinn, the animated series on
We
DC.
are out of time, so let's take a recommendation list to the Facebook group. And if you're not in the Facebook group for Rainbow Space Magic, please join. There should be a link in the chat at some point, or you can get it in email. Again, I'm Valerie Mikles. I'm doing a reading tomorrow, and I'm on a breaking the gender binary panel tomorrow. Anybody else? Chloe, where are you going to be, and what do you do?
Yeah, I am going to be at the panel. Let me see here. I'm just looking. Yeah, I'm on the panel, What Makes Queer Spec Fit Queer, tonight at 8 p.m. And then I'm going to be doing an author reading tomorrow night at, I believe, 7 p.m. Yeah, going to be reading Duality, so I'm excited about that.
And Olivia, where else are we seeing?
So I'm going to be on the religion panel in about an hour. And I'm reading First Thing with Valerie tomorrow morning. So yay.
All right, and that is our panel. Stick around. The next reading is going to start in about less than 10 minutes. And we'll see you on Facebook. Bye, everybody.